Let me do this. See. Uh, Hello. If you guys can hear us or hear myself, can you please indicate in the chat? Let me make sure that we are communicating. I do see some folks. Oh, yeah, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Marianne. So the name is Amazing YDK. We will be starting here shortly. What you have there is just housekeeping rules for everyone. I'm sure you guys are used to it by now. If you said the dev conference from Tuesday the 3rd. So I, without further ado, would be passing this over to Steven. Steven is a colleague of mine who has been here at Blackbaud for over 18 years as a principal software engineer on the architect team of Luminate Online. He's a go-to guy for everything Luminate Online, as far as I know. So he's an expert on online APIs from both the engineering side and the development side. So recently, he's been working closely with the engineering team on working out the checkout functionality, which is kind of what we are going to talk about today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Stephen. But if you have any questions, please feel free to pop it in the chat or in the Q&A section. And then after the session, after the session, we can go ahead and proceed. I hope everyone, if you got all that, give me a thumbs up, and then we can get this going. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. All right. So over to you, Stephen.
Great. I'm going to take control of the share here. Give me just a moment to set that up. Sorry, one moment. Sorry, I do have sharing options in here somewhere. One second. There we go. All right. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be talking about Blackbaud, Luminate Online, the APIs, and checkout. Now, as you may be aware, we recently had this awesome change to Luminate Online to use the new checkout functionality. And with that change, there came a lot of changes to our APIs to use that new checkout functionality. I'm going to be going through some of those changes and talk about how to set up an API donation form in this new setup or in the new checkout functionality, and also to some of the tips and tricks around that, as well as showing a live demo of this in use. I will be sharing the both the slideshow that I've got here, as well as the examples afterwards. I don't have them available to share right away, but they will be available after this is complete. So first off, I'm going to do a quick talk about the Luminate Extend library. The Luminate Extend library is a small library that we have set up available on GitHub as an extension of jQuery to help simplify API calls to the Luminate Online environment. It has a number of advantages, such as maintaining authentication token and session information within the Luminate Extend library. It supports client-side LO API methods and includes a number of useful helper functions for LO API forms. This is also where our examples from today's session are going to be published later. Currently, the examples that are available on the Luminate Extend library are just for the old donate API method. I've been working on updating them to show examples of donate checkout instead. I highly recommend the Luminate Extend library. It makes making API calls to Luminate Online much easier. And I'll show you some of that here as we go through my examples of the donation form. So the first big change is for the checkout modal. As you may be aware, for the new checkout functionality, there are two main ways to display checkout on donation forms. One is a modal setup where you see the normal donation form, and then after you've filled out the donation form and click the button to donate, it pops up a modal to display the checkout information and capture the payment for that donation. This is one of the easier options for how to set up a donation form because, well, I'll show you why it's easier here in just a moment. The general steps for setting up a checkout modal using the APIs, there's several steps that I've got listed out here for you on the slide. One of the keys that I always recommend for donation forms is to start off by calling the get donation form info method at the very start when the page loads to get the information, the metadata about the donation form from the API. Among other things, this now includes checkout configuration, which is all of the information that you need to load and create checkout transactions. Once you've called get donation form info, you'll use that checkout configuration to load the checkout script on the page and initialize it with the environment information. That's all happening behind the scenes as the page is loading. The donor, when they see the form, will fill out the donation form with all of the non-payment information. The donation form in this scenario, in the modal setup, does not have any of the credit card number or PayPal or any of those fields on the form itself. All of that is included in the modal. So they fill out the donation form with the non-payment info. Once that's done and they click the button to donate, that's when you call the validate donate checkout method. The validate donate checkout method is going to go through and start validating all of that non-payment info that they've filled out. The reason this is highly important is because we want to make sure that there are no problems with recording the transaction within Luminate Online after the payment is completed. So we call validate donate checkout to make sure that everything except for the transaction information matches our validation requirements. That includes things like making sure that required fields are populated, making sure that they contain valid values, all of that sort of thing. If the validate donate checkout method returns a success response, then we'll open the checkout modal to collect the payment authorization. The payment authorization, in this case, it's going through the modal to collect the payment data, such as credit card number or connection to PayPal, Google Pay, etc. And it is doing an authorization on that payment information for the amount that's been selected on the donation form. When that's complete, it returns a transaction token or transaction ID back from the payment modal to the page that opened it. And that transaction token, along with all of the rest of the payment information on the form, is then submitted to the donate checkout method, which is the method that is going to take all of that information, record the transaction in Luminate Online, and complete the payment transaction that was just authorized in the checkout modal. And of course, after a successful response, we want to display a thank you page to the donor. So we're going to pause for a moment here and take a look at what this actually looks like. Let me see here. Give me a moment as I pull up the correct page for this. Here we go. All right, so here I have a very, very basic donation form that has been set up. On this donation form, this is for a fake nonprofit organization called the American Health Society. You can see it's just got the donation amounts, the billing information, the email address, and a donate button. When I select an amount, fill in some of this information. Let's see. And click on complete donation. Oh, it throws an error. That's not supposed to happen. So we're going to do a quick look at how to debug this. What I've done here for this, let's take a look first at the, let's see. What we're going to do here first is we're going to take a look at the tools, or at what exactly this donation form is doing and why it's giving us these errors. So first off, we're going to take a look at the donation form information. The way that I've set up this donation form, I've set it up using Luminate Online, or Luminate Extend. So we have the I should take a pause here for a moment first and go back to what I was talking about for Luminate Extend, just so I can give you a bit more information on what exactly that's doing. Within Luminate Extend, this is the Luminate Extend library. It provides a wealth of information here as far as how to set up your site for APIs, how to include the library, how to initialize the library, and then how to make API calls. One of the fancy bits of technology that we have here is a luminateextend.api.bind function, which will look for forms that contain the Luminate API class and bind those so that when they are submitted, they trigger the Luminate API or Luminate Extend functionality to make an API call to that form with based off of the action, method, and other information that's included on the form. This takes advantage of things like the method to display or to identify which method of the API you're calling. And of course, all of the other information, the inputs from the form. So back here on the donation form, if I slide this over again, you'll see that I've got this Luminate API class here on the form to identify it as the form that I want to use for Luminate Extend. I also have a callback function for validate donate callback, donate checkout callback, and a method here for validate donate checkout. This means that the form is going to call the validate donate checkout method when it gets submitted using that API and send back a response to that validate donate checkout callback method. That's saying a lot of words really quickly. We have a form ID here that matches up to the shadow form that has been configured that we're trying to make a donation to. For those of you that are familiar with shadow forms in Luminate Online, anytime you're making a donation on an API-based form, you have to identify the donation form that you've configured on Luminate Online to submit the form to. And that's the one that we're using here. Within the rest of this, much of the rest of this information is pretty standard. I've got just a standard email address. I've got a standard set of billing information fields for all of the default fields that are required for a donation form. And in the donation levels, I have a set of fields here that identify the different donation levels. One thing that's a bit interesting that I've set up here for this sample donation form is adding an additional attribute for the value of each donation level in cents. This is useful because the amounts that we submit to Luminate Online are done in cents rather than in dollars. That's all documented within the donation amounts, or within the API documentation. But I use that later in my JavaScript to retrieve the amount dynamically, so I know what value I can send to the checkout modal. I'm going to take a quick look at my console here. Oh, all right. So I've already identified one error that I've run into, which is somehow I did not properly set up my get donation form info callback function. As I mentioned, one of the first things that the JavaScript here is doing when the page loads is trying to call the get donation form info method. And this should be the name of the callback function that it's getting in response, or that it's going to after a successful or failed response from that API method. Let's take a look and see what's going on there. So if I yeah, that's definitely where it's running into a problem. Delightful. Okay. We're going to pause on that page and go take a look back at the actual code that I was writing for this. Give me just a moment to pull that up. We get to have some extra fun in this live demo doing some live troubleshooting, which I know is everyone's most exciting time. So here's some of our code that I've written for this. We'll see here that I've got, let's see, This is the main JavaScript file that I've set up for the JavaScript that is that we're running. You can see I started off by initializing Luminate Extend with the API key and path, and go on to setting up the different functions. For example, this function is all of the JavaScript needed for the login form that shows up at the top of the page, as well as the callback function for after you log in. Down here in the donation form, interesting. It looks like I've got that callback all set up, but it's not recognizing it. All right, that's delightful. So we're going to have to go at this from a more abstract route than a full demonstration, just because this code is not working the way that I had planned it. I apologize for that, but let's dive into the code and take a look at what this code is doing. In this code here, we are starting off by when the page loads, if we've got a donation form on the page, then we grab the form ID from the donation form. We use Luminate Extend to record that value as the donation form ID, because we're going to be using that in later calls. It's just a good practice to record that information somewhere within the JavaScript, and Luminate Extend provides a very useful global function that can be used to store and easily retrieve data of a variety of different types. We're then calling the get donation form info method using that donation form ID. And the callback should be going to get donation form info callback to get the response. Now, when we get this response, what it should be doing, first off, it is checking to see, wait just a moment. I'm going to do something real quick here. There we go. Always looks better when it's nicely colored. So when we're getting the response from the get donation form info method, one of the first things we do is we look at the checkout options to see if checkout is enabled. If so, we're going to call we're going to take the PCO JavaScript location value that's provided within the checkout options in that response, and we're going to load that script on the page. Here I'm just using the jQuery get script function to do that. You can also use other functions to create a script element and insert it on the page however you would like. I'm then creating a function to initialize the payment checkout service. This function here creates a checkout configuration object, which uses a number of the checkout options that I've just retrieved from that get donation form info response. Oh, you'll note that I also used Luminate Extend here to put all of those checkout options here into the Luminate Extend global variable. Again, this is optional. I just wanted to have easy reference to it later, but I could just as easily have used the data.getDonationFormInfo response.checkout options to reference that information. So here in the checkout configuration, we're setting the environment ID, the payment configuration ID, the application name, the workflow mode, which this is where we select whether we want a modal or inline experience for the checkout functionality, the zone, the locale or language, the payment options, and the primary color. For the payment options in checkout, typically everything is enabled unless you specifically go and disabled it, with the exception of direct debit. The checkout options in the response from Get Donation Form Info will tell you each of the different options that have been enabled. So you can easily just check to see if debit is enabled and add that to your payment method options. Unfortunately, the checkout configuration object, all of these variable names that the object expects are slightly different from the values that are returned in the checkout options object in that Get Donation Form Info response. So you have to do a bit of mapping between the different values, like the merchant account configuration ID that's returned in the checkout options from Get Donation Form Info is going to map to the payment configuration ID in that checkout configuration for initializing the checkout service. Similarly, the zone, according to the checkout service configuration, is called the PCO environment zone in the response from Get Donation Form Info. Once you've done that, you can optionally do some logging of what you've done. This is useful when you're creating the donation form, just to make sure that you can check the console and see that everything shows up. Then you call, then this calls window.blackbaud checkout with that configuration and adds a couple of events that it's watching for. It's watching for a checkout complete event on the checkout service, a checkout modal.ready event, and a checkout modal.canceled event. Now, I could add other functions within, or other commands within each of these to do different things. So far, they're just doing alerts or logging things to the console. This is up to your development for what you want to do. In these cases, the checkout complete function or event is called when the checkout modal finishes and returns data about a successful transaction. So I'm sending that data to call donate checkout, which is going to be the final step of submitting the donation form. The checkout modal.ready event fires whenever the checkout modal code has finished loading and is ready ready for the modal to be opened. The checkout modal.canceled event, of course, is what triggers when the modal opens and then the donor clicks the cancel button instead of continuing through with the payment. So all of that is within my initialize payments checkout service function. And I then set up an event listener to look for the BB checkout loaded event to call that function. The BB checkout -loaded event is what fires when the script that we just loaded finishes loading and is ready to be used. So again, all of this is just setting up the configuration for the checkout functionality to get it ready for whenever the donor clicks on that button to open the checkout modal. If we continue scrolling down here, you recall that when I set up the donation form, I set it up with the validate donate checkout API method with the intent of calling this validate donate checkout callback as the response. This is going through and just checking, first off, did we get any errors in the response? If so, we're going to show different errors, hide any loading message that we may have shown, and allow the donor a chance to correct those errors. We've got the same setup here within the success, because sometimes validate donate checkout will return an error response object. Sometimes it will return a success object, but have an errors object inside of it that contains more detail about specific errors. This is primarily used for field errors, where a specific field has failed validation. So here we're using another one of Luminate Extend's very valuable utilities called ensure array to make sure that the field error that it's returned is an array of items before we start iterating over it. Because sometimes the field error will be a single item or a single object that contains an error message. Sometimes it will be an array of error messages. This is just a simple function to make sure that whatever is passed to it is actually an array, even if it's just a single object. Now, the fun part of this code is if we do not have any errors and we have a valid success response to the validate donate checkout method, then we can come down and do what we need to do to open the checkout modal. In this case, what we're doing is setting up the transaction parameters that we're sending to the checkout modal to open it up. The most important one of these being the base amount, which is the donation amount that has been selected by the donor, or the donation amount that's been specified in the user entered amount donation level. So you see I've got a little bit of code here that checks to see, do we have the other amount option selected on the donation form? If so, get the amount for that object, parse it as a currency, set that as the value. If we don't have the user entered amount, then we just use the amount that's been provided for the donation level. And again, that's where that attribute that I mentioned earlier comes into effect. Makes it very easy to specify the donation levels and their amounts in the HTML of the form and just get that value directly from whatever's been selected. Other options that could be used here for getting the amount include getting the information from the get donation form info method, which includes a full list of the donation levels along with their labels and amounts and the donation level IDs, and using that information to identify, based off of which donation level has been selected, what the value should be for that level. There's a number of other transaction parameters here, and I will be showing the documentation where you can find all of the information on these parameters. But in particular here, I have the billing details, which includes the information that the donor filled out from the donation form. I'm pulling that information in to set up this transaction parameters object and send this information to the modal. Once I've got this transaction parameters object created, I call the checkout service.checkoutmodal.openPaymentForm with that parameters object, and that opens up the modal, which displays the payment information to the donor. If they go through that successfully, that's where these events that I subscribed to earlier come into effect. So either they can cancel, in which case, well, they close that screen and go back to the normal donation form, do whatever changes they need to do there. Or if they successfully submit a payment, the checkout complete event fires, and that calls the call donate checkout method that I've created here. So this function is pretty simple. First off, it's looking at the data to see was the transaction a success, and is there an ID for that transaction? If so, I'm going to show a little loading message to the donor because the checkout modal has just closed, and I want to let them know to stay on the screen before we continue. And then I call the Luminate API, the Luminate extend to make a call to the donation method or donation API. I just noticed another error here. So what I should have done here, this is a step that I forgot slightly. I'm using the same donation form that was used earlier for the validate donate checkout method. So what I want to do is find the method parameter of that form and change it from validate donate checkout to just donate checkout. Otherwise, the API is going to call the validate donate checkout method again, and that's not going to be useful for us. In this case, we're expecting that that we've successfully completed the validation in order to get to this step, and now we're ready to make the donate. You can see that I've got the form selected here as the same donation form selector. The Luminate Extend library is going to serialize all of the inputs on that donation form and append them to whatever is set up for or whatever is included in the data, which in this case is just the transaction token. That's the only additional piece of information that I'm submitting to the donate checkout method that's different from what I submitted to the validate donate checkout method. And we have the callback that is used for a successor response. Now, again, here in the callback, we've got an error handling section in the errors, a second error handling section in the success. We hope that these will never show, because at this point we've already called the validate donate checkout and gotten a successful response. So hopefully there shouldn't be any problems on the donate checkout, but I still like to have these included just in case. If there's no errors, that's when we show a thank you message, which is just showing the confirmation amount. At this point, the transaction has been successfully recorded within Luminate Online. The transaction that was authorized in the checkout modal has been successfully confirmed and completed as a full transaction, and the donor is done. Of course, you can choose to write this to direct to somewhere else or whatever you need to do to display that kind of thank you information to the donor. Again, this is just an example of what you can do. So now that we've gone through the donation form with the modal, I'm going to talk briefly about what the difference is for between the checkout modal and the checkout inline code. In the checkout inline code, the main difference is that instead of displaying the payment information section after they click the button to donate, instead you display the checkout information or the payment information fields in line within the donation form. This operates in much the same way as the checkout modal, but it's a bit more complicated. It's the main reason it's complicated is because you are loading the checkout element in line on the page after you get the get donation form info call to get that checkout configuration. It's a slightly different checkout. It's a slightly different checkout modal than, or a checkout configuration than what you had before. So whereas before you had that workflow mode of modal, with the inline, you would have a workflow mode of inline, and I believe an additional parameter to identify where you want to insert that checkout modal or the payment elements on the page. Again, you allow the donor to fill out the donation form. However, as they're filling it out, you want to be sending all of the relevant non-payment information to that checkout inline element. So in the checkout modal, we had the that transaction parameters object, and we use that to just send one time to the modal to open the payment form. With an inline configuration, you're sending any updates to the checkout service, to that checkout inline object, as the donor is updating each field. Once they've updated enough fields or all of the fields beyond other than the payment information, you'll still want to call validate donate checkout. Ideally, the checkout inline element will be disabled or non-functional before you call that validate donate checkout, just to make sure that you can validate everything that they've done before you try and get collect the payment information. Again, if you get a valid response, you can enable the checkout inline fields to collect the payment authorization. In that area, it works identically to the checkout modal. It's just displayed on the page instead of opening up a modal to gather that information. And much like the checkout modal, when it completes, it will fire a checkout complete event, which you can capture to get that transaction token. And again, submit all that information to donate checkout exactly like you did before. So the main changes here have to do with how you're updating the checkout inline element with the donor's information as they're filling out the form. Making sure that you validate all of that information before you allow them to fill out the payment information. Again, that is critical because we want to make sure that at the point where we are doing the payment authorization, everything else that they've filled out on the donation form meets the requirements to successfully record the transaction in Luminate Online. And we do have the documentation for this all included on our website in the API documentation. It's very extensive, and I will have some links for that at the end of this. There is one last option that we have for doing a donate checkout call, which is not using the checkout modal or checkout inline functions that we have set up already, but going straight to a integration with the BBMS payments API. This works almost identically to the inline setup, except it gives you a bit more control over the actual fields and configuration of that you're displaying for the payment section. Essentially here, you go through everything as normal for getting the donation form info, letting the donor fill out the donation form, calling validate donate checkout to make sure that all of the non-payment information is correct. The difference here is that you are displaying the payment information fields, such as the credit card number, the expiration date, CVV, all of that. You're displaying those fields yourself and calling the payments API with that payment information, along with any of the other billing information that's required, such as name, address, email, etc., to do that authorization. That returns a similar transaction token, which you can then submit along with all of the rest of the non-payment information on the form to call donate checkout. So again, the big difference between the payments API integration and the checkout inline integration is that checkout inline will handle all of the different payment types for you. So if you want to allow direct debit or ACH donations, if you want to allow PayPal, Google Pay, other forms of digital wallets, checkout inline will show those options automatically for you. Payments API integration, you have to deal with that directly yourself. It gives you a bit more control over the fields that you're displaying to the donor, but you pay the price for that extra control in the extra work needed to call the payments API. So here I have a set of resources that are available for this. Starting off, the developer.blackbaud.com/LO API is our primary resource for Luminate Online APIs in general. And we've got a checkout section in the getting started portion of the LO API documentation that goes over just a wealth of different things that you can sorry. It goes over essentially everything that I've talked about here, along with the full documentation on what all of the different options are for the for checkout, for the LO APIs, and how you're intended to integrate those. That focuses primarily on the here. Let me. This focuses primarily, goes through all of the different steps. What we've been talking about here is pretty much just the update your API forms step for how to set this up. But this has a lot of different information about everything you need to do for these, including links to some of the other resources, such as the integration guide for checkout. Oh, give me just a moment. There we go. This section of our APIs of our API documentation focuses on the integration guides, everything that deals with checkout in particular. So that's including the checkout modal code, the checkout inline code, and how to and all of the different parameters that are required for those. So you'll note that some of the information in here, there's sample integration code that shows a lot of the same functions that I showed earlier. Some of the code that's in here in this sample, I directly stole from my example to show you with Luminate Extend. But yeah, this shows you the different parameters, and it does get into a lot more information about the full list of parameters that you can look at for initializing and then calling the checkout functionality. So like here, it specifies that the base amount needs to be the monetary amount in cents. So it's just a whole number, not a decimal value. It goes into billing details with all of the fields that are included in that object. All sorts of useful documentation here about the checkout functionality. The configuration parameters are what I showed at the beginning of this, using the information that you get back from the get donation form info method. All of these parameters are documented here. We also have the inline the modal documentation also goes into the events that you can listen to, namely the checkout complete as one of the most important ones for when the checkout modal finishes. Inline has a similar set of information with the a sample inline integration, a checkout configuration. Again, we've got that workflow mode of inline instead of modal here. And in the we've got some sample code here for subscribing to the inline checkout and complete checkout button events, along with the documentation for what those should do. Yeah, just a great set of documentation here on this. And one of our last bits on the slide, or one of our last resources here, let's see, one of our, I guess, more middle ones here. This is the API reference for the payments service for Blackbaud checkout, which goes into that third option that I mentioned for all of the for the payments API that you can use to take more control over over the different transaction parameters, information that you send to the payments API to get that, to set that up, including full instructions on how to get the API keys that are needed for that, how to set up your Sky application, create a payments API user account. All of that is located in here. So we do also have in our help files a set of API FAQs and questions about checkout in particular. that goes through a bunch of different frequently asked questions about how to deal with all of these new APIs. And of course, finally, I have the link to Luminate Extend here in our resources. So with that, as I said earlier, I will be providing the information that we've got here, all of the resources, as well as the sample code that I provided after this is complete. Stay tuned for that. The example code in particular, once I finish it up and make sure that everything is working with it and that it submits successfully, that sample code will appear within the Luminate Extend library so that you can reference it at your leisure. And I hope you've all had some fun going through this with me. Please let us know if you have any questions, and thank you all for coming. Happy developing.
Yeah, thanks, Steven. We really appreciate the work. I know we have like a minute left. I don't know if there are any questions for Steven at this point in time. Okay, looks like this will also end in the next 50 seconds or so. I would send out a quick survey right after this for everyone to react and let us know how we did with the presentation. But again, like Steven says, we have all the resources right here and would be made available to you to reference for future use. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.